Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we get the privilege of talking to Terrestrial today. She is an individual with the Sasquatch Data Project. And I first was introduced to her work through TikTok. And it is very, very interesting stuff indeed that I don't really hear a lot of people talking about in the way that she is doing. So welcome to the show, Terrestrial. How's it going?
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I'm doing good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. And just having a good Sunday afternoon, hanging out, getting to talk about Bigfoot. So I can't complain about that. Let's start at the beginning. What was it that first got you into Bigfoot to begin with, Terrestrial?
Yeah, so I have kind of a funny story of how this all unfolded. I was like 5 years old, and it was kind of weird because I was home from school that day, which never happens. My dad was also home from work because he was prepping for a colonoscopy the next day. So we were just like vegging out on the couch while he was doing that. And he's always been into like kind of like aliens and ghost stuff. So we were watching Discovery Channel, and Doug Hychek's Sasquatch Legend Meets Science came on the TV. And that's where I saw the Patterson-Gimlin film for the first time. And my brain just like exploded. I was like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And kind of from there, I was just hooked. And I've been looking into it ever since.
That's awesome. Yeah, Doug is such a cool guy to talk to, and he's really a pioneer in the field. I can't wait to see when his second documentary follow-up to that comes out, maybe later this year or the year after. We'll see. I know they have a little bit of work left to do, but yeah, we'll all be waiting for that as well. So, Terrestrial, walk me through what the Sasquatch Data Project is.
Yeah, so I guess in its essence, I'm trying to put Bigfoot witness reports into a format that's optimized for data analysis. So I'm essentially creating a giant spreadsheet that's, you can, run whatever statistical analysis you want to. If you want to, use it for any kind of coding, you can. And it's also open source too. So anyone can go and download it off of my website. At the time, let's see, right now I'm about 1,500 reports deep into the BFRO website. And I'm parsing all of those reports into about 136 columns, I think, right now is what I'm up to. And those columns are, composed of different traits to Sasquatches, whether it's physical, environmental, behavioral, that kind of thing. So in its essence, that's what it is. But I'm also really interested in the mathematical side of things. So like actually using the data set for statistical analysis and seeing what we can learn about Sasquatches.
That's interesting. Do you have a background with data or math then?
I do, yeah. So honestly, when I was an undergraduate, I kind of did like a PhD as an undergrad. I had a really great opportunity to work on NASA's Dawn mission. And I was very ingrained into the team, and I got to first author a paper. I got to co-author a number of papers regarding my research on this dwarf planet in our solar system called Ceres. And a lot of my research was having to maintain and create like a very large data set and then running statistical analysis on that data. So I feel like I'm kind of pulling those skills that I got from my research and, applying it to the Sasquatch field.
That's fantastic. I would imagine that is probably not anything you're involved with currently, though.
No, it's not. No.
Gotcha. Now, what are some things that you have come across when you start to jump into this data? Have there been any things that have jumped out that just have, gotten you really excited when you start looking through it?
Yeah, I feel like every day I'm kind of thinking about, oh, I could go look into this. Oh, I should go look into that. So I have a tendency to kind of bop around into, what I'm looking at. The question though that kind of got me to actually start working on my data set with the Sasquatch Data Project is, I heard someone say once that Sasquatches are more active under full moons. And I was like, well, how do we know that? Because there's not data to back that up. It's just something that was said. So that was actually my first kind of analysis that I did with the data set. And that was one of the most surprising so far, I think, where I did find that there is an increase in reported Sasquatch sightings under full moons, but also new moons. So when the moon is 0% illuminated. And that difference in the reports during those times is statistically significant compared to those reports for the middle values of moon illumination. So that's really interesting because you go, well, why would that be the case? And to me, I think it points towards evidence of Sasquatches partaking in this predator-prey relationship that's very documented. Essentially, nocturnal predators engage in this under full moons. Prey have evolved to learn that nocturnal predators can see better, therefore they decrease their activities. So, nocturnal predators will increase their activities because they're hunting, but also they know that prey are going to be less active, so they're like staking out their territory and that kind of thing. And then under new moons, it's kind of the opposite, where prey are more active because they know that predators can't see as well. Therefore, predators are spending more time hunting. So their activities increase under these new and full moon conditions. And to see that in the data with Sasquatches is just fascinating, honestly. Like, I know correlation does not necessarily mean causation, but it is really interesting to see the similarities there.
That is fascinating. Have you had any researchers reach out to you yet and been like, yeah, you're on the ball with this, or maybe you're a little off with this?
Oh, no, no one has really said anything about it yet. And I'm like hoping to get some feedback. Like I've been thinking about that a lot, actually. I'm like looking for feedback, like, to see what people think about it. But no one's really reached out to me yet.
Well, one of the reasons I'm having you on is so hopefully you will get some feedback. Listeners might be like, yeah, this isn't the normal Bigfoot Society show. Let's hear about someone who sees Bigfoot. Well, guys, I think this is pretty important that we are aware of this research that Terrestrial's doing. So this is kind of like a one-off show. So I think we all can learn a great deal from what she is doing in her research. But have you been able to use the data that you've been looking through to kind of get a better picture of what Sasquatch might normally look like?
Yes, I have. So lately I've been looking at the heights of Sasquatches. That's been something I'm interested in, particularly if there are differences in the reported heights between regions. So lately I've been comparing physical traits between the southern and the western regions of the United States. And so far, I have found that there is not really a difference between the heights that are reported, at least between the South and the West. They came back not statistically significant and very close in value. I think like the West was 7.28 was the average height, and then the South was 7.4 feet. But I'm just pulling those numbers out. It's somewhere around there. But what I did find that was interesting is that there are differences in the hair colors that are reported between the southern and western United States. Something that I was interested in looking at particularly was I feel like I hear a lot that there are more reports of like red-brown Sasquatches in the South. So I looked into that, and it turns out there are, and it is a statistically significant difference between the western United States. I actually found that there is a meaningful difference between the number of reports of red, brown, white, and gray Sasquatches in the South versus the West. So that's really interesting because I think the thing is too, especially with the statistical significance testing, is it essentially tells us, is this difference that we're seeing in the data meaningful, or could it have happened due to just random chance? Like that's just how the data decided to fall. And when you do find statistical significance, it's essentially telling you, okay, something is going on to cause this to happen. What that is not clear right now, but the chances of this just randomly occurring are very small, like less than 5%. So those are two things that I've been looking at recently that I think are pretty interesting.
Have you been able to find a baseline or maybe information about normal behavior of the Sasquatch due to all these reports that you've been looking at?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, because I would say the majority of the reports that I go through are extremely short. So typically either the witness sees the Sasquatch or the Sasquatch sees the witness first, and then they make eye contact, or they just, become aware of each other, and then one of them leaves the encounter. Typically, it's not like a prolonged encounter where the witness is actually watching them maybe like eat or drink, or I don't know, just exist in the environment, do whatever they do. So I haven't pulled stats on like who's leaving the encounter first. Is it the witness or the Sasquatch? But I am keeping up with it in the spreadsheet. So that would be that would tell us something about their behaviors. I do know that intimidation encounters or like aggressive encounters are not that, at least they're not very commonly reported. Currently in the data set, about 5% of reports involve like aggressive behaviors from Sasquatches. So right now it's, I can't make any certain, I can't like for certain say that there's like a certain way they should behave, because the encounters are typically very short, like less than a minute. But yeah.
That's interesting. In the community, there's seems to be these different things that are always passed around verbally as kind of like community knowledge. And it's very cool to see some of these things maybe be proven or disproven due to analysis of data. Have you found, after looking through your data, that Class A sightings happen more towards certain times of year?
So this is the interesting thing. And I want to touch on what you just said a little bit, because that's also part of the reason that I'm working on the Sasquatch Data Project. It's because I feel like there is a lot of, there are a lot of ideas in the community, but there's not a lot of data to back up the ideas. So part of what I'm trying to do is essentially take these ideas that are passed around and say, well, based on at least this subset of reports, that doesn't seem to be true, or this does seem to be true. So yeah, that's definitely a big component of what I'm trying to do as well. I'm sorry, I got off on a different train of thought.
Yeah, that happens to me a lot too. Have you found that Class A sightings happen more towards a certain time of year after analyzing the data from the sighting reports?
Yeah, so at least how they're reported, Class A sightings do tend to cluster among certain months. I can actually pull up at least my most recent data, because I just looked at this. So it looks like, so for Class A sightings, actually, I didn't do it by class, so I can't quite tell you. But at least for sightings in general, not designated by Class A or B, right now, July has the most, followed by October, which is interesting. So they definitely, and reports do cluster around the summer and fall months in general, whether that's more so due to human activity or Sasquatch activity. It's unclear at this point, but I do know that the majority of Class A sightings do happen during like the summer and the fall. And an idea that I've had that we can kind of, that I've been thinking about at least for a while, is potentially looking at like the national parks publish the amount of permits that they give out every year, particularly for like backpacking permits. So I'm like, well, if we could look at that and see when people are at least going backpacking or like into these more remote parts of the parks and stuff, I wonder if we could somehow use that data to determine if, more people are going out into these more remote parts of the continent during these months, and maybe that's why we're seeing this increase? Or is it more of a Sasquatch thing, like they're more active during these times of year? I haven't quite figured out how to make that jump yet. Yeah, at least for reports, there are more during the summer and the fall.
That was really interesting because, if you go by what you hear, or at least what I hear from the community, it's like, you got to go out in October. Like October is when the crazy stuff happens, but it's like July. Wouldn't really think so. I mean, or maybe there's some listeners that are like, well, maybe you should really think so. You're not talking to the right people, Jeremiah. But yeah, that's extremely interesting. Is there data that you wish you had from these encounter reports that you're reading?
Yes, a lot of the time, like I said, with my data set, I have over 135 different traits or different variables that I'm looking at, and most of the time, most of the columns remain blank because either the witness didn't offer up the information, which is totally valid. Like they've had an encounter that a lot of them don't know how to process it, so they don't even know like what the researcher would be interested in knowing. But then the follow-up from the researcher, I feel like there's missed opportunities there to extract more information, especially from these Class A close range sightings where the witness got a really good look at the Sasquatch, particularly like facial features, like eye size, eye color, nose shape, different like cranial structure features, or in some cases, like the reports don't even include like a hair color from Class A sightings, which confuses me. So a lot of the time there are times when I'm like wishing I had more information, especially latitude, longitude information for where the sighting happened. There's this thing you can do called maximum entropy, where essentially you can, by using like latitude, longitude locations of where an animal was, you can essentially stack that with different environmental layers, I guess, and basically run it through an algorithm, and it'll tell you where you're likely to see that animal based on the features surrounding that location of where it was seen. So like that's something that I'm really interested in doing too, but I don't have enough latitude longitude data to actually do that because you need quite a few points based on the region that you're looking at. So that way we could actually like predict where you might have an encounter with a Sasquatch, where they might be based on other sightings. So yeah, I'm always looking for more information. I love getting into the details of things, but I would say like the physical traits and the latitude longitude data I'm always looking for.
That seems like a really big deal. So I want to make sure that I get that correct. So let's say someday you get enough of that data, you could have the computer program make a map where it's like, instead of us just going off of, oh, well, this person tells me, yeah, you should check out this state park or national forest, you could have a map where it would like show you really good ideas of where to go and check out. Is that correct?
Essentially, yeah. So biologists use this to predict where other species might be, like what they're interested in a particular species. And the thing about it is, though, you have to be pretty specific because, the capacity of what computers can run is only so much. And also, you don't want to make it too broad because then it will kind of overestimate an area. So the problem is getting enough reports from a pretty small area. Even like statewide is a little too large. You can do it, but you have to have a high enough density of sightings to be able to properly run the algorithm, basically. So yeah, so it potentially could be a very powerful tool. It's just, having enough data to do it.
Powerful in the right or wrong hands, for sure.
Yeah.
It would be interesting. Approximately how close are you to being able to run a program like that?
I started working on it actually last month. I had this idea of like, oh, we could probably do that. Like, let me see if I have enough data points for latitude, longitude. I am pretty far away, at least from my reports that I'm getting off of the BFRO, because I am going through reports by hand.
Mm-hmm.
It's taken me a while to get through everything. And I'm about 1,500 reports deep. I've got about 5,000 more to go. And that's just one, data set of reports. So it really just depends on the state and the area of how many data points would be enough. Yeah, it really just depends. I mean, the more data, the better, right? So as much latitude, longitude data I can get, the better the program will essentially predict. I definitely don't have enough right now.
Man, if you could get access to the flats, that would be awesome. That is allegedly the name of the backdoor database for the BFRO, and I'm sure there's way more information on there. That's just me hypothesizing because I'm not in there. But so you have to manually go through all these reports to pretty much see if they have a latitude and longitude in them, right?
Yeah, so there's a couple things, and this is kind of what I've run into, extracting any information from the reports, is the witness, there aren't always latitude, longitudes just blatantly on the report. Sometimes the researcher will give us, it'll say like GPS coordinates or, whatever, or the witness will actually provide latitude, longitude, but that's not very common. A lot of the times, the witness will give an extremely detailed location.
You there?
And then walk 20 more feet, and that's where this happened. So I'll go on Google Maps.
Sorry, I get a lot of weird stuff happening in my phone calls. Do you mind repeating that just a little bit? Your phone went out entirely.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So with the reports on the BFR website, they do not always give a latitude, longitude. Sometimes they do. Sometimes either the witness or the researcher who follows up will give a latitude, longitude. But most of the time, it's the witness giving like a really detailed description of where their encounter happened. So they'll say like, turn onto this road, go to this mile marker, and then like drive 20 more feet, and that's where the encounter happened. So I'll go on like Google Maps or something and I will go down the street view and find the spot and then extract the latitude, longitude that way. So like some people have suggested like, web scraping or something to extract the latitude, longitude, but honestly, most of the time I'm having to go and manually find it like in Google Maps or Google Earth or whatever.
Man. It feels like there should be some other. I get it though. I mean, like sometimes you just have to put in the work, but that's a lot of work. Wow.
It is, but it's worth it. Like it's really fun. I like it. It's a challenge, but yeah, I'm like, if I could have more, more data.
Have you found any? Well, I would imagine you're looking at a lot of these places manually through Google Maps. Have you noticed any similarities of the places that are starting to come out or any commonalities?
This is something that is pretty interesting because I haven't really noticed any kind of clustering or anything of like environmental traits. But to be fair, I haven't really looked into that too much. I've been more focused on like the physical traits of Sasquatches. The majority of reports do happen in more rural areas, and quite a few happen at private, residences, people's houses. There's quite a few road crossings, and those typically happen on more rural roads, though you do have like the highway every once in a while. It's like, you go on Google Earth and there's plenty of cars traveling on this highway. It's not like a obscure road or anything, but I haven't really looked into the more environmental aspect of or locational aspects of the reports too much.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's say someday you are able to get, we'll call it like this ultimate Bigfoot algorithm where you can run this program and you can see like, oh, show me the areas in Washington State where it's the best idea for me to look for Bigfoot. What is your hope that would be used for the good?
Yeah, that's a really great question because I've thought about this, and that the Maxent modeling is not 100% going to be correct. It's essentially looking for features either in the topography or in the vegetation or proximity to major roadways and things like that. Like it's looking for features that aren't going to be super apparent to humans. So it's not going to be like spot on every time for sure. It's more of a tool to at least get an idea of, okay, well, this area has a lot of the same features of where, these sightings occurred. So I do want to make that like clear that it's not going to tell us exactly where they are, at least, help us choose better spots to go research. And I would hope that it's used for research. I would hope that, it's purely used for research. And, I hope for the best for the Sasquatch species, I guess. Like I definitely don't want to help people like hunt them or something. I'm definitely like wanting to conserve the species. So I do hope that it would be used for purely research. And yeah.
No, I definitely agree with you. I mean, at the end of the day, if there is species of Sasquatch or Bigfoot in the United States, which I think we both believe that, one of these days, there's going to be a whole lot of information put out there, and the right people, which should be all of us, need to stand up really quick and start probably a conservation effort. And we've had that chat a few times on the show in the past, and it's an interesting one. How do you start a conservation effort before creatures actually even discovered? Yeah, it's an interesting conversation to have. Are there any other ideas that the community might throw around that you are trying to, I wouldn't say challenge, but look into if they're actually valid with your data?
Yeah. So currently I've been looking into, and at least on TikTok, I get a lot of pushback on this one, but I'm really interested in learning more about the actual heights of Sasquatches, because just based on the data, I'm not totally convinced. And a lot of like my own personal thoughts and beliefs are purely based off what I'm seeing in the data. I'm not totally convinced that they are truly reaching these really extreme heights of like 10 plus feet, even like the really, high 9.8 feet and stuff, like these really extreme heights. I'm not totally sure if that's a product of the witness's fear. There's this thing that happens when you're scared where you perceive the stimulus as much larger, sometimes up to 30% larger than what it actually is. It's a pretty documented phenomenon. It has a lot of different names. I call it fear-driven magnification. It's just one of them. But yeah, basically when you're scared, you perceive the stimulus as either or anywhere between like 17 to 30% larger than what it actually is. And so in my latest investigation that I've done, an analysis that I've done, I found that as witness fear levels increase, so does the average height of the reported Sasquatch. And this increase is statistically significant between like the elevated and extreme witness fear groups versus the mild fear group. So that's been something I've been pretty interested in. I also found that while every witness fear group has these reports of like 10 plus foot tall Sasquatches, 77% of those reports fall into these elevated and extreme fear groups. And you can kind of look at that two ways. You can either look at that as, well, it could be evidence of this, fear-driven magnification, or you can look at it as, people are going to be more scared of a 10-foot tall Sasquatch versus a 7-foot tall Sasquatch. But in my mind, we know this happens. This is like a thing. It's both mental and a physical thing that happens in your brain. Your amygdala basically lights up, and that's the structure in your brain that processes emotion, particularly fear, and then it does send feedback back to visual cortices that, then influence further perceptual processing. So like we're going to see this happen at some point in these witness reports, because in most of these reports, the witnesses are really freaked out. I mean, they're having a potentially life-altering encounter. They're very scared. So I think that's something we really need to keep in mind when we're thinking about the size of Sasquatches, is keeping in mind these psychological things that do happen when you are scared. And that's been one of my recent things that I've been looking into and thinking about a lot.
That's extremely interesting. I'm sure this conversation would be totally different if I had actually had a visual sighting prior to this interview, which I haven't. How do you figure out that a report falls under being really scared or not so scared or extremely scared? Like, how do you make that back and forth?
In every report, I can't always determine. The fear level isn't always explicitly stated. So in those cases, I just put like NA, like that's my placeholder, not applicable. So I basically created 5 different fear groups. There is the no fear group, where the witness explicitly states they were not scared during the encounter at all. There's mild, where, the witness was basically like, I was a little freaked out, but really it wasn't, anything crazy. Moderate, the witness may or may not have some kind of physical reaction. The hair stands up on their skin, or, they just basically say, I was scared. That's what I designated moderate as. Elevated is the witness expressing, more elevated fear. Maybe they start sweating, they start to get goosebumps, they say they were very scared, like even just as simple as that. And then extreme is when the witness explicitly states, like, I'm never going into the woods again. I actually just read a report this morning where this woman will never drive after dark anymore because her experience was so terrifying. Or they say, like, I was scared to death. I was terrified. I've never been that scared before in my life. I would say the majority of reports are in that moderate and elevated fear group. But yeah, I basically just have come up with like a classifications for the different groups.
It's extremely interesting how you had to do that. And it's pretty cool too. There's a left field question, just because I think this is kind of interesting how it comes up in some reports that I've received over the years. Do you find that a lot of the reports that you're analyzing talk about orangutan features or anything like that?
Yes. I don't know about a lot, but it has been brought up. Like, it does stand out that people sometimes do describe, especially the hair on the arms, as orangutan-like. I would say that I've read more reports where they describe the facial features as more gorilla-like, if they are going to attach it to one of the great ape species. If it doesn't resemble a human, I typically see gorilla more, or the body stature more gorilla-like. But on occasion, I have read those reports where they say it was more like an orangutan. And it would be interesting to see if that's like a regional thing, if that seems to be clustered in particular regions or states.
Exactly. Yeah, that's I was just thinking that as well. I mean, this is an off to the side, but man, I just love going to the Omaha Zoo. I'm out in the Midwest, and like there's a really great orangutan exhibit there, and just watching them. They're so smart. You watching them and like imagine, man, can you imagine being in the Pacific Northwest and you see something that kind of looks like that, but it's a lot bigger? That would just be like mind blowing. For sure. In your analyzing of all this data, does anything ever come up with like track size?
Yes. Yeah. I've analyzed quite a few footprint reports. I think at this point I'm at around 120 reports that I've analyzed that are footprint reports specifically. Now, I will say that most of the reports that have a footprint size, like a length, a ball width, heel width, a depth, the witness, it's not clear if the witness actually measured the footprint with like a ruler or anything like that. Typically what I see is they have like either a picture of their boot next to the footprint, or they give like a general size estimate. So I have to be really careful with how I present the footprint data, because it's not always, usually it's like an estimate, or like they're going purely based off of their shoe size, which is not always super accurate either. But I have gone through about 120 footprint reports so far.
That is really cool. You're doing everything by hand, or, just by yourself. Have you ever considered using AI at all to analyze huge amounts of data, or is there maybe a certain way you feel about using that?
I use AI all the time.
Okay.
So yeah, when I'm going through reports, in the beginning, I was purely manually going through reports. Like I was reading everything, extracting information, and it was taking me forever to get through reports. I use ChatGPT and Claude to help me get through reports. Basically, I feed it my column names, I feed it the report, and I have it, extract information for me. But there's some problems with that. So if you ask these large language models a question twice, they don't always give you the same response, and especially in the same format. So that creates an issue when you're trying to extract information for something like what I'm trying to do with the Sasquatch Data Project, where I'm trying to optimize it for coding. I'm trying to optimize it for data analysis. So it needs to be very structured and in a particular format. Well, AI doesn't always follow the format. And it also doesn't always extract the information correctly, especially in these reports where maybe multiple encounters were reported in like one report. It'll get confused. It'll start basically putting the wrong information with the wrong report. So I do have it help me to get like the quick information out, but I do still have to manually read everything, extract, fix issues, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I do use AI a lot, but I definitely don't lean on it, and I don't trust it to do all of my parsing of the reports for sure. But it is very helpful, and it has sped up the process for me a lot. It also helps me with my code, because how I do my analysis is I write everything in Python, and that's how I'm doing my statistical significance testing, and my statistical analysis is all through Python. So it's definitely helpful with the coding part, but for parsing the reports, there's some issues with it, but it does speed up things quite a bit.
Do you think that at any point you might start bringing in other data sources besides the BFRO, or you probably will be focusing on just this for a while?
Oh, I would love to. My ultimate goal with this, so with data analysis, you want to pull from as many sources as possible. You want to have you don't want to basically put all your eggs in one basket. So I would really love to start pulling from other data sets or other databases, especially ones where they do the reports have to go through some kind of check. They've got to either do follow-up reports with witnesses or something like that. But I would love to include other databases in the data set. It would really help strengthen these results too that I get with the statistical analysis. But for now, I guess for now I'm just going to keep going with the BFRO, but I would love to start pulling in other databases of witness reports.
Absolutely. I mean, the main one that would come to my mind right now would be, the Bigfoot mapping project. There are quite a few unique witness reports that come into that one. That might be something I don't know if you've ever looked into that one before, but.
Oh yeah, I have. And yeah, like I said, I'm super open to pulling in other databases for sure, because essentially it just strengthens the results that I'm getting through the analyses that I'm doing. When you do pull data from different sources, and it's been checked and it's credible.
Absolutely. Maybe to switch gears for a little bit here at the end. Have you ever experienced anything that might be considered related to Bigfoot out in the woods, or had any weird encounters yourself, or has this made you want to go out and kind of look for things yourself?
I've had two really weird things happen that I can't attribute to anything that I at least, nothing, I just can't attribute it to anything else. I grew up on a farm in Northeast Georgia, and in a pretty rural part of Northeast Georgia. And the first weird thing, I guess, that happened was basically how the house is set up. It backs up to about 15 acres of woods, at least on our property. And then that property, or our property, backs up to another 150 acres of woods. And then there's like some farms scattered around. But my dad was like on the back porch, and he comes in and he's like, there's some people walking in our woods back there. And my mom and I were really confused because, rural Georgia, people trespassing, it's not a good combo. Like most people aren't going to do that. So we go out on the back porch, and you could distinctly hear two sets of bipedal footsteps. It definitely was not a quadrupedal animal. It was like bipedal footsteps, and definitely two of them. And you could hear like a woman's voice. But the weirdest thing about it was that they were close enough to where we should have been able to understand what they were saying, but you couldn't understand them. And it also, at the same time, sounded like it was on the edge of hearing. And I know it doesn't really make sense, but I've heard other people talk about this when they say that they've, heard Sasquatches communicating. Like, that's the only way to describe it. And I totally understand what that means, because that's exactly what I heard that day, was like it's close enough to where you should be able to understand them, but it also sounds just bizarre, and it's like on the edge of hearing. But I can't definitely say that those were Sasquatches we were hearing, but it was just like really weird. The second thing was weirder. Basically in that house, my bedroom was against the back wall of the house. So again, right next to the woods. And I woke up one night, and I was hearing this noise like right outside in the wood line of what sounded like a really demented turkey, like gobbling. And then there was like this horse snort at the end. I know that sounds so weird, but that's the best way I know how to describe it. And then you could very distinctly hear bipedal running back and forth in the woods, just running back and forth and doing this like weird turkey gobble thing with a horse snort. And at first I thought, like, okay, this is like the most messed up turkey I've ever heard. Like something is wrong. But then I realized, like, turkeys don't snort. And also, there's no way that I would be able to hear it running in the woods, because it wouldn't be large enough. We had horses on the farm, and we would let them kind of like free roam on the property, and I could barely hear them in the woods from my room. Like, you could barely hear their footsteps. And, they're like 8 to 1,200 pound horses. So I'm like listening to this thing. I'm sitting there, and at one point I'm like, did the horses get out? But then I was like, no, they don't, that doesn't sound like a horse. But the other weird thing was, we had dogs that lived outside, and they were totally silent, and they usually barked at everything. Like, it was just weird that they weren't barking or anything. So I'm listening to this for at least 6 or 7 minutes of this weird turkey gobble horse snort. And then it just stops. And that was it. That was the whole thing. Nothing else ever happened. It was just a really bizarre experience.
That is very, very strange. I agree. Anything weird ever done to the horses themselves?
No, they never had anything happen to them. I've heard reports of like Sasquatches like braiding horsehair and stuff, but we never had anything like that happen at all. Sometimes they'd be more spooky, at times, and other times we always thought, okay, the bear's back or something. But no, nothing weird ever happened like that. It was more just like auditory stuff that was weird. And again, I can't for sure say that they were Sasquatches, but also, like, I don't know what the heck that would have been. But yeah.
It's very interesting. I've never heard anything like that myself. I do get a lot of reports where it's like weird combinations of animals, doesn't really make sense. And it's very, very strange, is what it comes down to. But Terrestrial, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show today. And I feel like we've learned a lot through what you are doing with your work currently. Is there a way that my listeners can help you, maybe by sending data or anything like that?
Yeah, if you have any kind of reports, especially if you have like an exact latitude or longitude associated with the report, you can send them my way on my website, sasquatchdataproject.com. I also have a resource on there that, either witnesses can use or researchers can use. It's basically like a worksheet with a bunch of different questions on it that you can fill out and send back to me. And I can start compiling those reports into my data set. But yeah, you can contact me through email. It's just contact@sasquatchdataproject.com. Or you can message me on like Instagram or YouTube or TikTok. Any social media that I'm on, the handle is @SasquatchData. But yeah, those are a couple of ways to get in touch with me.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for coming on the show today, and best of luck with your future research.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list. Number 1, encounters from Franklin County, Texas. Number 2, encounters from the entire state of Iowa. Number 3, encounters from Oak Ridge, Oregon, or the surrounding area. Number 4, any individuals that know about Bigfoot being flown off after the Mount St. Helens eruption. Number 5, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter while in the military. Number 6, those that have had a Bigfoot encounter in the southern New Hampshire or north central Massachusetts area, including Franklin County, Massachusetts. Number 7, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter in a Bible camp or Boy Scout camp setting. Number 8, individuals that have had Bigfoot try to enter their house forcibly while they were living inside. Number 9, individuals that have actively have a Bigfoot living on their property. And lastly, any sightings that are in the Ouachita National Forest area of Oklahoma or Arkansas. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one. If you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.